the Igbo Landing, the untold story of African resistance. In the early 1800s, on the shores of what is now St. Simon Island in Georgia, United States, a powerful act of resistance took place. It is a story of strength, of freedom, of a people who choose dignity over slavery. This is the story of Igbo Landing. Let's go back in time. In 1803, a group of about 75 Africans, men, women and children, were sold into slavery and loaded onto a ship called the Wanderer. These were not just any Africans. They were Igbo people from what is today southeastern Nigeria, known for their deep sense of independence, spirituality and pride. They had already endured the unimaginable, captured from their homeland, forced into chains, and taken across the Atlantic Ocean on the brutal Middle Passage. When they arrived in Savannah, Georgia, they were brought by two plantation owners, Thomas Padrin and John Cooper, who planned to force them to work on their coastal rice plantations, but they never made it there. Instead, they were put on a smaller boat called the Schooner York to be transported to St. Simon's Island. But what happened next would shock the slave traders and would go down in history as one of the boldest acts of collective resistance in African American history. As the boat approached Dunbar Creek, the Igbo captives did something extraordinary. According to oral tradition, they rose up. They overpowered the crew. They refused slavery, and then, hand in hand, they walked into the water, chanting in their Igbo language. They said, "Mmụọ ga-akpọna anyị ụlọ." The water spirit will take us home. Rather than live in chains, they chose to die free. The place where this happened became known as Igbo Landing. Local people say the water still remembers their voices, that their spirits are still present, that birds won't fly over the creek, and that strange things happen when you get too close. But is it just a legend or a historical fact? In 1930, a researcher and a folklorist named Dr. Lorenzo Down Turner interviewed elders from Georgia's Gula Jechi community. These are descendants of enslaved Africans who kept much of their African heritage intact, especially language and storytelling. They told him the story of the Igbo who walked into the water. Then in 1988, another scholar, Professor Michael Gomez, helped confirm that the story aligns with the history of a slave shipment that landed in Savannah in 1803. Even more powerful, documents show that some of the Igbo captives actually did drown, and a few may have survived and escaped into the surrounding marshlands, where they were hidden by free blacks or Native Americans. So yes, the Igbo Landing story is real. It is both a fact and a legend, and it has inspired generations of African Americans and Africans in diaspora. Artists like Beyoncé in her Black is King film referenced Igbo Landing. Writers like Toni Morrison have used the symbolism in pop culture and political protests. It has become a symbol of resistance, pride and spiritual power. And here is the deeper meaning. The Igbo Landing was not just about suicide. It was about choice, about power, about reclaiming dignity in the face of slavery. These people, stripped of everything, still had the courage to say, "No, I will not be broken. I will not be a slave. I choose freedom, even if it means death." It speaks of the warrior spirit inside the African soul, the same spirit that led the Haitians to rise in Haitian Revolution, the same spirit that inspired African Americans to march for civil rights, and yes, the same spirit that lives in Igbo people today, across Nigeria, in the diaspora, and in every person who fights for freedom and justice. So what does the story of Igbo Landing teach us? It teaches us that history is not just in books. It's in blood, in land, in spirit. It reminds us that Africans were never just victims. They were fighters, thinkers, spiritual leaders, and warriors. It challenges us never to forget where we come from and to protect the stories that colonialism and slavery tried to erase. So, when you hear the name Igbo Landing, remember the creek, remember the chants, remember the power of a people who said, "We would rather die free than to live in chains." Let their courage inspire your own. Let their legacy live on, because the spirit of the Igbo people still walks with us, and their story is not over.